Parents with nanny cams. What's the most bizarre thing you caught on it? My grandpa had been staying with my parents for a while, and they figured it would be best to hire a regular sitter to watch my younger siblings overnight. They didn't think my grandpa was up for the task, especially since they were attending a wedding a couple of hours away and planned to spend the night at a hotel nearby. To keep an eye on things, they set up nanny cams in a few rooms: the kids' bedroom, the master bedroom, living room, and kitchen, all motion activated. Normally, they wouldn't have bothered looking through the footage if everything seemed fine when they got home. The master bedroom cam had never been triggered before, so they didn't think twice about it. However, when they returned home, they noticed that the camera in the master bedroom had been activated. Curious, they decided to check the footage, and what they saw was beyond anything they could have imagined. The video showed my grandpa, who was about 70 at the time, and the sitter, a 20-year-old, both aggressively making out and were without any clothing. They were stumbling around the room, tangled together, and eventually made their way toward the bed. Then, for the next 20 minutes, the footage showed them engaging in some bedroom gymnastics. I still can't believe what I was hearing as my dad called me immediately after watching the footage, laughing uncontrollably. Meanwhile, my mom was crying in the background, completely mortified by what she had just witnessed. She was shouting at my dad to throw out the sheets and kick Grandpa out of the house. My mom, still in shock, called the sitter to confront her, and the girl apologized, saying there was a connection or some nonsense like that. When my mom asked my grandpa what he was thinking, he simply replied, "At my age, you must seize every opportunity." I can't even begin to imagine what kind of game my grandpa was playing to get that sitter into his bed. Sometimes I lie awake at night, wondering what kind of lines he used to pull that off. And honestly, I kind of wish there was audio for the build-up. I'm dying to know how it all went down. Story 2. I got fired because of a nanny cam. I was working for a wealthy family by Australian standards. The dad was a surgeon who had invented some kind of specialized surgical screw, so they were definitely living comfortably. I was 25 at the time, looking after their 5 boys, 17, 16, 11, 9, and a surprise toddler who was 3 years old. The older boys didn't really need me at all, as they were already independent. The 11 and 9-year-olds were sweet and easy to look after, but the toddler? He was the worst kid I'd ever cared for. Really bratty and demanding, though he never actually crossed the line into anything worse. But let's just say he definitely pushed my limits. One day, we were stuck inside building Star Wars Lego, and he was in full boss mode, going on about the catwalkers we were building. I tried to correct him, saying it's AT-AT, not cat, but of course, he lost it. He flipped the fancy Lego table over, yelled that he hated me, and stormed off downstairs. Now, being the consummate professional that I am, I calmly flipped him off, just for a solid 2 minutes, before I finally went downstairs to check on him and try to cheer him up. The very next day, I was fired. Turns out, the family had a nanny cam set up, and I didn't exactly come off as the picture of professionalism in that moment. I guess that 2-minute salute didn't sit well with them. Story 3. My brother had a camera set up in the basement for safety reasons, just to keep an eye on things. He had some workers come over to fix a tile shower that wasn't draining properly. The workers seemed pretty frustrated about having to redo the job, but honestly, it was their own fault for not doing it right the first time. My brother had already paid them for the initial job, so it wasn't like they had a reason to be upset over doing it again, but they were definitely not happy about the situation. A couple of weeks later, my brother's sister-in-law was celebrating her 21st birthday, and the family gathered in his basement bar to help her celebrate. They were all having a great time, pouring shots of Vinic, a colorful liqueur that was popular at the time. But as they were pouring the shots, they immediately noticed something smelled strange. At first, they couldn't quite put their finger on it, but her boyfriend was the first to say it smelled like nail polish remover. He asked if anyone else noticed it, and they all agreed that it was a little off. Since they were all a bit suspicious, they decided to check the security camera footage from the basement to see what might have happened. When they looked at the footage, they were shocked to discover that the workers had actually taken some of the Vinic and replaced it with an entire bottle of nail polish remover. The workers had somehow drunk from the bottle and then carefully refilled it with the toxic substance. It was completely messed up. They found the empty bottle of nail polish remover hidden under the bathroom sink, and my brother's wife immediately recognized it. It was the unopened bottle of nail polish remover she had bought just a few weeks earlier. She had no idea it was missing until then, but it was clear that the workers had replaced the alcohol with it. It was an unsettling moment, realizing that something so dangerous had been done in their own home. It was a really messed up situation, and it definitely left everyone feeling uneasy. Story 4. My mom had always been a bit suspicious of our maid, thinking she might be stealing the silverware. To be honest, my mom's just naturally nosy and kept an eye on everything. She started noticing little things. Forks, spoons, and knives would mysteriously disappear over time, so she grew more convinced that our maid was taking them. Well, turns out, my mom wasn't just being paranoid. The maid really was stealing the silverware. But, as wild as it sounds, the whole situation ended up being overshadowed by something much bigger. My dad was having an affair with the maid. The silverware theft became irrelevant compared to the scandal of my dad's infidelity. Story 5. This isn't about a nanny cam, but rather a video. My sister-in-law thought she turned off the camera but ended up leaving it running. I ended up with over an hour of footage of her tormenting my toddler in a pretty cruel way. She kept teasing him with candy and popsicles, telling him he could have some but holding it just out of his reach. Then, to make it worse, she ate it in front of him while making exaggerated eating sounds. She also called him hurtful names, like Turd Muncher and Ricky Retardo. The video captured all the audio, but only some of the video footage. The video cuts off right as we came home. When I confronted her with it, she completely denied everything, claiming I doctored the footage. She went off, calling me a liar, an asshat, and accusing me of hating her because she was prettier than my wife, which, by the way, she absolutely is not. That was the last straw, and from then on, she was never allowed around our kids unsupervised. She was my sister-in-law for about 10 years, but now she's the crazy Karen ex-sister-in-law. I can't even have a presence on social media anymore because she constantly attacks me with lies and tries to drag me through the mud. She's also the reason I'm estranged from my brother now. She's completely warped his perception of our family. He still believes all the bizarre things she's accused our dad, our sister, other family members, and even me of. No matter what I've shown him to disprove her, including video evidence, he still clings to her twisted version of things. People might suggest I do something to fix it, but at the end of the day, you can't fight crazy. Sometimes, life just isn't fair. The best I've been able to do is ignore her. Eventually, she moves on to attacking someone else, like an annoying, yapping dog that just needs to get under your skin. As for my brother, I just hope time helps to heal things. Part of me thinks he might be more like her than I realized. Birds of a feather, right? Story 6. My dad has cameras set up around the house, along with smart lights. They used to live overseas, but still kept the house here. One time, my brother and I were hanging out at their place while they were away on a trip. They had just left for the airport, and we settled in to watch some TV. It was already after dark. Out of nowhere, the lights in the house started flickering. I got so freaked out, I nearly jumped out of my skin. After a couple of minutes, I got a text from my mom that made me laugh and sigh with relief. It said, "Sorry, we're about to take off. Your dad is sitting here cackling, watching you guys jump around as he turns the lights on and off. We'll let you know when we land." Apparently, my dad was having a good laugh at our expense, messing with us from the airport through the smart system. Story 7. A buddy of mine had a baby at the start of last year, and it didn't take long before he noticed something a bit unusual happening during nap time. Both his cat and his beagle had developed a habit of sneaking into the crib with the baby while he was napping. At first, it seemed kind of cute, like something you'd expect from a pet that loves the little one. However, as time went on, it became a bit more of a routine. The two animals, one small and sneaky, the other big and cuddly, would climb into the crib with the baby, but it wasn't all cozy bonding time. Instead of curling up beside him in a loving, protective manner, the cat and the beagle would somehow manage to push or kick the baby to one side of the crib. Then they'd settle in the center, completely claiming the space for themselves. It wasn't exactly the most selfless behavior. If the baby started to move or roll over, they'd both glare at him, as though he was invading their precious territory. It was like they had established an unspoken rule. This crib was their space, and if the baby was in it, he was simply a guest who needed to stay out of their way. It wasn't cruel by any means, just a bit too territorial for a baby's nap spot. It was both hilarious and a little bit ridiculous, but that's pets for you. Always asserting themselves, even if they have to share a crib with a little one. Story 8. I had been using a baby monitor to keep an eye on my aging dad, just like you would with a child, except this time, I was watching out for his well-being. My sister, who had never been involved in caring for him, came into the room one day and tried to convince my dad to cut me out of the will and give everything to her. To be honest, I just ignored her. This wasn't the first time she pulled something like that, and I had grown used to it. She was a housewife with grown kids, yet she had no interest in helping with the elder care. Meanwhile, I was the one who put my life on hold to care for my dad. I ended up essentially stopping my career to make sure he had everything he needed. It wasn't easy, but it was something I felt I had to do. For 12 years, I gave up my own goals, my time, and a lot of my personal happiness to ensure he was taken care of. My dad was fully aware of everything I had sacrificed for him. He knew it wasn't easy for me, and he recognized how much I had given up to be there for him when no one else would step up. In the end, he made sure that most of what he had would go to me, as a way of thanking me for all the work and love I had put in over the years. It was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, I was grateful for his recognition, but on the other, it stung that my sister, who hadn't lifted a finger to help, would try to take it all away. But my dad knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. Story 9. I really wish I had a nanny cam back then. My stepsister had agreed to watch my brother, who has disabilities, while I was away. She seemed like a responsible choice at the time, so I didn't think much of it. However, what I didn't know was that she was dumping out the contents of his medication capsules and using them for herself. I had no idea this was going on until things started to take a turn for the worse. My brother, who had been stable on his medication, began having seizures constantly. It was terrifying. I rushed him to the hospital, where we learned that his condition had worsened significantly. This was the second time he'd ended up in the hospital in a short period, and we couldn't figure out what was happening. After some digging and discussions with doctors, we finally uncovered the cause. My stepsister had been tampering with his medication. She'd been taking doses from his meds without anyone knowing. By the time we found out, his health had been severely affected, and it was devastating to see him go through such a traumatic experience. I wish I had known sooner so I could have prevented it, but all I could do was make sure he got the care he needed once we figured everything out. Story 10. I worked as a preschool teacher in the late 90s, and at the time, our school decided to set up secure webcams in the classrooms so parents could watch their kids during the day. The webcams were only accessible to parents who had proper usernames and passwords, so only those with children currently enrolled could view them. As a parent myself, I thought it was a neat idea, even though I was aware there might be the occasional awkward moment, like if I had to adjust my clothes or something. However, there was one major issue that came up. Within a month of the webcams going live, 2 parents approached us with concerns about their co-parents' online activities. One reported that her partner had been using the webcam to view inappropriate content involving me and another teacher. The second report was even more disturbing, as the co-parent was found to be watching content involving the children. A third report came from a parent who found still images of another child on her husband's computer. As you can imagine, this led to the immediate removal of the webcams. Child Protection Services, which, back then, was known as HRS, were brought in to investigate the families involved. In response to these incidents, we even changed our pickup and drop-off procedures, restricting parents to just the entry areas where the children's cubbies were located. I only worked as a preschool teacher for a few years, and this happened near the end of my time there. I later learned that issues like this were not uncommon in preschools and daycares that used webcams. To clarify, I never had access to the video feed myself. My own child wasn't enrolled at the school, so I couldn't view any of the footage. The director of the school was made aware of the incidents, and the staff was subsequently informed. There were 2 classrooms involved in the incidents, one in mine, and one in the other teacher's room. And yes, I'm a woman. Yes, I'm confident in my appearance, but I'm probably around the age of your mom. This is actually my 3rd Reddit account, and I intentionally chose a username that might sound more neutral. Story 11. This wasn't on a camera, but rather on a baby monitor, something my aunt liked to talk about from time to time. When her children were small, she experienced something that left her shaken for years. One night, she was lying in bed, everything calm and peaceful, when suddenly she heard a deep, almost eerie voice say, "It's me, the monster. I came to get you." Naturally, she went into full panic mode. Her heart raced as she bolted out of bed and rushed to her child's room, fearing the worst. But when she got there, the room was empty. Her child was sound asleep in the crib, completely unaware. Confused and still anxious, my aunt went back to her room. She could hear the voice again, louder this time. "It's me, the monster. I came to get you." Now she was seriously freaked out. Was there someone in the house? Was there a threat to her child? In a panic, she searched the house, but found nothing. Finally, after a few minutes, she realized the voice was coming through the baby monitor. It wasn't a person in her home at all. The voice belonged to one of her neighbors, who had been playing with his child. It turned out that the baby monitors they both used operated through the power grid. Since they had the same model, their monitors were somehow picking up signals from each other, making her hear whatever was being said through the neighbor's device. It was a relief to know there was no monster after her child, but it also left her with a strange feeling every time she heard the baby monitor after that. The idea that a stranger's voice could come through without warning, without any explanation, was a little unsettling. Story 12. I wasn't a parent, but I'm almost certain my dad caught on to this. When I was in college, my dad asked me if I could dog and house sit for him and my mom while they were away. I agreed, but made it clear that I'd be bringing my girlfriend along. They were totally fine with it, and honestly, I think they liked her more than me. She's now my wife, so go figure. As the week went on, like any college couple, we enjoyed our time together and banged pretty much anywhere we could. Halfway through the week, we were chilling in the living room when suddenly, my dad's voice came from nowhere asking, "Everything going well? The dog's okay?" I swear, I nearly jumped out of my skin. It turns out my dad had installed a mic and camera system all over the house without telling me. I wasn't sure if he had actually caught us, but the cameras erased everything from 24 hours prior, so there was a solid chance he had. After that, we kept things strictly to my room. No more risks. Story 13. This isn't a story about me, but rather a coworker of mine. And it's one of those situations where everything came together in the most unexpected way. She had 3 cats at home, and apparently, when she was away at work, they were causing all kinds of chaos around the house, scratching furniture, knocking things over, and making a mess. So, she decided to set up some cameras to figure out which one of the little troublemakers was responsible and, hopefully, come up with a way to stop them from destroying everything in sight. But before she could figure that out, she ended up witnessing something way more serious. As she was reviewing the footage, she saw 3 men break into her house. The sight was enough to send her into a full panic. She couldn't call 911, though, because she lived in a different state than she worked in, and the 911 centers couldn't transfer calls across state lines. She was stuck, unable to reach the help she desperately needed. Fortunately, she got incredibly lucky. One of our other coworkers, who happened to live at the opposite end of the same county, was in a unique position to help. This coworker, a bit older and closer to my age, had grown up before 911 was a nationwide system, and his parents had made him memorize his county's 7-digit fire and police dispatch number. He still knew it by heart, and even better, the county had kept that number active so local residents, employees, and other departments could directly reach the dispatch center. Without missing a beat, he rattled off the number, and she quickly dialed it. To her relief, the call was routed to the right dispatch center. She was able to talk to the police, providing them with detailed descriptions of the intruders, the rooms they were in, and even where they were crouching down in the house. The police were able to respond quickly, and the 3 men were arrested without incident, even though all of them were armed with guns. Not only was all her property recovered, but it turned out the burglars had also been involved in break-ins at 2 other houses on the same street. Thanks to the quick response, they were all caught, and each one received a lengthy prison sentence. And to think, it all started with one very bratty cat causing enough trouble to lead her to set up those cameras in the first place. If it wasn't for that, she might never have seen the break-in in time. Sometimes, the most unexpected situations, like a mischievous pet, can end up being the catalyst for something much bigger. Story 14. My buddy has a camera set up on his doorstep with a motion sensor. Every time it detects movement on the porch, it snaps a photo and sends it straight to his phone. It's one of those small conveniences that helps him keep an eye on deliveries or any unexpected visitors. One Sunday morning, he found himself enjoying a rare moment of peace. For once, his 2-year-old wasn't shouting into his bedroom, demanding to be let out of his crib. It was a quiet morning, and he was finally able to relax in bed for a few extra minutes. He was almost dozing off when his phone suddenly went off, a new notification lighting up the screen. Curious, he checked the alert. The photo on his phone showed a small, red-headed boy reaching out of the front door to grab a package that had been left on the porch. At first, he thought it was a neighbor's kid or some random child playing outside. But then, as he looked closer, he realized the little redhead was wearing pajamas he recognized all too well. It was his son. Apparently, his 2-year-old had figured out how to climb out of the crib. There he was, wandering out the front door, completely unaware that his father was seeing the whole thing from the safety of his bed. In that moment, my buddy quickly realized that his quiet morning had come to an abrupt end. Not only had his son successfully escaped the crib, but he was also on the verge of getting into even more trouble by heading outside alone. It was a wake-up call for sure. His little one was growing up faster than he could keep track, and he was no longer confined to the safety of his crib. So much for that peaceful Sunday lie-in. But at least now he knew it was time to child-proof things a bit more thoroughly. Story 15. I know of a family who employed a full-time nanny/cleaner/cook, which, in Hong Kong, is often referred to as a helper. These helpers typically work grueling hours, 20 hours a day, often with only Sundays off, and are expected to live in the family's home, sometimes even sharing a room with the children. This particular woman worked incredibly hard for this family, juggling an intense schedule with very little rest. Her daily routine started early. She'd spend hours getting the kids ready for kindly, making sure they had a nutritious breakfast, cleaning up after them, and tidying the house. She'd then tackle hours of house cleaning, often taking 3 to 4 hours to get everything spotless. Afterward, she'd prep dinner for the family and set out activities for the kids to do when she was out picking them up. This was all in addition to her other duties around the house, preparing meals, managing the household, and more. Essentially, it was a full day's work for very little pay, with minimal time for herself. But despite her exhausting schedule, there was one moment in the day when she allowed herself a brief respite. After completing her tasks, before heading out to pick up the kids, she sat down on the family's couch in the communal room of the house for just 15 minutes to rest. She wasn't being lazy. She was simply taking a short break to recharge before continuing with the rest of her demanding day, picking up the kids, making dinner, cleaning the house again, and welcoming the parents home. Unfortunately, her employers had installed a nanny cam, and this brief break was captured on video. In their eyes, the audacity of her taking even a small moment to rest was unacceptable. Despite working tirelessly for 10 hours straight, they fired her for sitting on the couch for 15 minutes, viewing it as an unacceptable use of time in the home she was contractually obliged to live in. This, after she had cooked, cleaned, cared for their children, and essentially kept their household running. Story 16. My girlfriend's parents have a security camera system set up around their house, which I always thought was a bit much, but whatever. I used to pretend that I wasn't too fond of her cat, mostly because I didn't want to seem too attached around other people. I didn't want to look like a softie, especially in front of her parents or anyone else who might judge me for getting too close to the animal. But deep down, I had a soft spot for that cat. One weekend, when her parents were out of town, we were in charge of taking care of the dog, and I decided to bring the cat over too, just for fun, you know? I thought it would be a nice surprise for her, and I might get a few moments of peaceful bonding with the cat without anyone else around. So, there I was, holding the cat above my head, and I started softly dancing in a little circle, completely absorbed in the moment, looking into his big, wide cat eyes. I didn't realize it at the time, but we were being filmed. The jig was up. Story 17. It wasn't a nanny cam, but rather one of those audio monitors that's designed to pick up sounds like a baby crying or other things that might be going on in the room. One morning, I was up unusually early, around 5 a.m., working in my home office. I had the monitor with me, as my baby daughter was just about 2 months old, and I wanted to make sure I could hear her if she needed me. Suddenly, I began to hear a very soft voice, clearly a woman's voice, talking. It was so faint that I wasn't sure if I was hearing things, or if it was actually coming from the monitor. My entire body went cold. I froze, stopped everything I was doing, and listened more closely, trying to make sense of what was happening. I could still hear it, and I was instantly on edge, worried that something was wrong with my daughter, or that something strange was happening in her room. I immediately began preparing to dash across the house to her room, heart pounding, when I heard a little more of the voice. That's when it hit me. I wasn't hearing anything from my baby monitor. What I was actually hearing was an autoplay video ad. One of those video/audio pop-ups that play on websites when you accidentally leave a tab open. The sound was coming from my computer speaker, which I kept turned down really low, so I hadn't noticed it earlier. I honestly thought my heart was going to stop. The adrenaline from the panic was enough to make me feel like I couldn't breathe, but once I realized the source of the noise, it all calmed down. I still couldn't shake the feeling of that cold dread in my bones, though. There's nothing quite like the moment you think something's wrong with your child, only to realize it was just an accidental click on your computer. Story 18. When I'm home from college, I usually babysit for a family that's pretty well off. At the time, the 2 boys I was looking after were about 2 years old and 9 months old. It was summer, and the weather was perfect, so I had just laid the younger one down for his nap and decided to take the baby monitor outside with me. I let the 2-year-old play in the backyard while I kept an ear out for the baby. After a little while, I heard strange sounds coming from the monitor. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I glanced at the screen and saw arms reaching into the crib where the baby was sleeping. My heart instantly dropped. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Panic set in as I grabbed the 2-year-old by the hand, snatched a knife from the kitchen, and began cautiously walking upstairs to check on the baby. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I was shaking. I could barely think straight, but I was ready for anything. As I opened the door to the nursery, I saw that the intruder was none other than the grandmother. She'd come by to help but didn't have my number, so she hadn't texted or let me know she was there. She just let herself in and was quietly checking on the baby. We both burst into laughter, but let me tell you, in that moment, I had never been so ready to shank someone in my life. The relief of realizing it was just a misunderstanding was intense, but the adrenaline rush from thinking there was a real threat was unforgettable. It took me a good while to calm my nerves after that, and I'll never forget how ready I was to protect those kids. Story 19. It was just me at home. I went into my baby's room to comfort him and gently said, "Daddy's here, don't cry." I picked him up and walked back to my room, but as I did, I suddenly heard the baby monitor say, "Here, don't cry." At first, I was confused, and then my mind went blank. My voice sounded so alien to me, like it was coming from somewhere else entirely. In a moment of panic, I watched in absolute horror as a tall man on the monitor appeared to grab my baby and walk out of the room. It honestly took about a second to fully register that it was actually me holding him, and I was the one in the video. But for that terrifying moment, I thought someone else was in my house. The rush of panic that flooded me felt like it aged me years in that split second. My heart was racing, and it was as if I went through a decade of stress and fear in that one instant. It took everything in me to calm down and make sense of what I had just seen. Story 20. Well, the nanny cam didn't catch my kids doing anything weird. I had it set up while my husband, kids, and I went away for a few days to visit family. I asked a friend of mine, who was a recovering alcoholic staying with us, to get back on track, to watch the house and take care of our dogs. I thought it was a pretty straightforward task. There was no alcohol in the house, and she didn't have a car. The nearest store was about 10 miles away, and with her only contact being her mom, who definitely wasn't going to supply her with any alcohol, I felt comfortable leaving her in charge. We were about 2 days into our trip when I texted my friend to check in. Hours passed without a reply. I tried calling her several times, but she wouldn't pick up. Then, her sister called me, worried because she hadn't heard from her either. That's when I decided to turn on my nanny cam to see what was going on. What I saw shocked me. She was lying on my couch in nothing but a tank top, and the front door was wide open. I could speak through the camera, so I tried talking to her, but she didn't respond, though I could see she was still breathing. I immediately called my uncle and asked him to go over to check on her and my dogs. I could see on the camera when he arrived. He tried waking her up, but she just groaned and wouldn't talk. He threw a blanket over her and then went to check on my dogs, finding them locked in the laundry room with a huge mess all over the place. To top it off, my dog had chewed up the hose on my brand new Dyson, and I was furious. My uncle stuck around until she finally woke up, and she had no idea what had happened. When he asked her how she got so messed up, she admitted that she drank a bunch of mouthwash. On a positive note, I'm happy to report that she's been sober for a year now, employed, and getting her life back on track. Story 21. I've been a regular weekend nanny for an amazing family for the past 4 years. Over that time, they've cycled through a few different weekday nannies, but I've always stuck around. The family has one monitor, and it's in the little boy's room. One day, the mom showed me a video on the camera that explained why they had to let one of the nannies go. In the video, the little guy said, "Mommy said I don't have to do that." The nanny, clearly frustrated, snapped back, "Well, it doesn't matter. Mommy is a expletive," and then proceeded to drag him out of the room by his shirt. It was beyond upsetting to watch, and needless to say, that nanny was immediately fired. Story 22. This isn't about a monitor or camera, but it's definitely a story worth sharing. About 6 years ago, I stayed with my sister for the summer. At the time, my nephews were around 4 and 7 years old, and they shared a room. One evening, I checked on them before heading to the guest room. They were both sound asleep. About 10 minutes later, the oldest came running out of the room, screaming and crying, saying something about a yellow rabbit in the closet that had been saying bad things to him. Naturally, I rushed in to check the closet. There were no toys, no stuffed animals, just a dresser and a bunch of hanging shirts. The youngest nephew was still fast asleep, oblivious to the chaos. I let my nephew calm down with me in the living room, thinking it was just a bad dream or imagination. But then, 5 to 10 minutes later, the youngest came running out, crying about the exact same thing. A scary yellow rabbit in the closet. I checked again, but still, there was no rabbit to be found. No toy, no stuffed animal, nothing. That house has a long list of creepy stories, and I will never forget that night. I'm not one to get freaked out easily, but after that experience, screw that house. Story 23. This wasn't me, but it happened to my aunt's friend. She had a suspicion about her nanny and decided to set up a nanny cam. She'd noticed that every time the nanny changed her child's diaper, the baby would cry a lot more than usual, way more than when anyone else did it. So, she thought it might be worth investigating. After watching the footage, it became clear what was going on. The nanny was using Clorox wipes instead of baby wipes whenever they were nearby. It turns out she was cleaning the baby's sensitive skin with harsh chemicals, which was causing the discomfort and crying. As soon as they discovered what had been happening, they fired the nanny immediately. The father ended up stepping in and becoming a stay-at-home dad to ensure the safety and well-being of the child from then on. Story 24. I dog sit for some neighbors, one of which told me she has a camera in the living room/dining room for her dogs. You know those ones that dispense treats? Anyways, I thought it was a strange essential oil diffuser until she told me what it was. I was being paid to play with him for an hour, but she found out that I was actually staying for 2 or 3 hours. When she asked me about it, I think I said something like, I'd want someone to do the same for my dog. Ever since then, she leaves me treats in the kitchen and even got me a Christmas present from the dogs. Story 25. I've been caught on camera a few times by different families. One family who had bunnies recorded me booping their noses to the beat of a song I was singing. Little bunny foo-foo, hopping through the kitchen, picking up all the lettuce and munch. Another family captured the moment when their 95-pound Mastiff puppy tackled me, and I just kind of laid there for a while. They immediately called me to check if I had a concussion, but I was fine. I just got the wind knocked out of me. Yet another family caught me reading a book to their kids, and afterward, they complimented all the voices I did. I had no idea they could hear the audio, and I was so embarrassed because I really went all out with those voices. Story 26. I travel across the US for work, and I'm lucky enough to bring my 2 beagles with me. They've never been apart from me for longer than the time I'm at work. They're 10 and 13. I have a camera I use to check on them occasionally, mostly because my larger beagle is incredibly clever. He can open doors, move chairs to climb onto counters, and more. Last year, I had to go to Michigan for an emergency while I was in Oregon. Since I don't fly with my dogs, I was in a tough spot and reluctantly hired someone from Rover to stay with them at my hotel for 3 days. She was fantastic, staying in touch and keeping me updated with texts like, tossing them a ball right now. I'd check in through the camera when it seemed like a good time. This woman was beyond impressive. Not only did she play with them enough to tire them out, but she also taught them new tricks, had them solving puzzles, and even got my 42-pound beagle to climb onto her back for push-ups. She was an avid CrossFitter. I was so relieved and incredibly happy with how she took care of my pups. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.